Yeah, I'm diving into the Women's March because Twitter basically told me I better. There was a lot of people communicating with me on this, not asking me to cover this, but treating it as a foregone conclusion that I was going to. So I'm going to. Now, I was hesitant because based on my sort of cursory exploration via Twitter, people have I'll go beyond saying strong. People have very calcified opinions on this issue, that they are dead set on one position or another and don't seem particularly interested in budging away from that position. And so all I ask is people watch this video with an open mind and just remember, this is my opinion. I don't speak for anyone else. I'm just trying to provide context and some information here. I'm trying to inform, not necessarily change anyone's mind. And this has been the struggle I have had the bulk of my career with editors and various producers and things like that who are like, the intent is to persuade. And yes, I know that's what they teach in writing courses and journalism courses and all these things, but I've been around the block for a while, and my attitude is the most persuasive thing you can do is to just present information without an agenda. And I think there is a real difference between the beliefs somebody holds and an actual agenda where you are, trying to manipulate people to create certain actions that may or may not be in their best interests. So with that caveats, I'm going to dive in. The first question I got a lot of people asking is, the snazzy way the press put it, was it a moment or a movement? And I personally think this is a foolish question. Of course it was a moment. It was a moment designed to create images like you're looking at right now, which is undeniably powerful. This sea of people peppered with pink, in front of the White House, blotting out traffic signs, with the American flags. It's patriotic. It's powerful. It shows that there is a collective concern with women's issues. And to me, that I think was the point. There is this ongoing campaign, and it is a campaign because there are people behind it with agendas pushing this, that the question of equality is solved in the West, that there's no more to do in terms of the class-based issues surrounding gender. And I say that very specifically because a lot of these issues predominantly affect lower income and impoverished women. But there's this belief that feminism, or whatever you want to call it, is dying, and you hear people say only 19% of Americans identify as feminist, and I'm thinking, only 19%? With the negativity surrounding it and the likelihood that people are going to attack you just based on identifying as a feminist, I'm personally surprised it's that high. Part of the reason I haven't dropped the definer, why I still identify as a feminist, is the only reason I'd stop referring to myself that way is it's too much trouble. It wouldn't change my beliefs at all. It would just be the path of least resistance. I'd just be bowing to the negativity. I'd be letting other people influence my decisions, and I'd be abandoning issues that I consider to be extremely important to radicals who I don't believe they know what they're doing. I believe that radicals on both extremes, some within the feminist movement, are using activism as a form of, I'd say therapy, but it's more avoiding the realization that they probably need therapy. And the first place you have to look when you're examining issues related to identity is inward. because you have to ask yourself, why do I care about this so much? And the reason I personally care about this so much is I don't understand why, based on my interests and based on my hobbies, that I am usually the only woman in a given room. You know, my enjoyment of technology, my enjoyment of computers, my love of video games makes me an anomaly. And I don't believe this is something that just happened. I don't believe that we have to create interest in technology. Look at all the teenage girls who are glued to their cell phones. I think that we have to eliminate the artificial barriers for women standing up and admitting they like this stuff, going, I love video games and I love superheroes. And, you know, it seems like many women, and I'm sure this is true of men of certain things, but some women will only come into these fields if they're granted permission. I call it princess in the tower syndrome. The idea that you have to wait for somebody to invite you to do something instead of identifying as the active voice, instead of identifying as that knight in shining armor or whatever you want to call it, the adventurer, and going out and doing it yourself. Because no one, you know, this whole idea of empowerment and granting opportunities, that's not reality. And from the time I was a teenager, I said, I don't believe in empowerment. There's power. And there are people who are powerful and there are people who aren't. And that's all that really matters. No one comes and holds your hand through achievement. You have to take that first step yourself. You have to stand forward and say, I want to do this. You have to pick up a controller. You have to, you know, start learning to code. And that is harder for some people than others. The barriers to access are much higher. I know for me, when I looked at entering computer science, the expectation was you already knew how to code to get into a university coding class, because some high schools offered that. My high school didn't. I got a little bit of coding in, it was stuff like Delta Draw. And, I got a little bit because I'm old enough to have had to use computers using DOS prompts. And so I knew a little bit of that, but we didn't have a computer club. The big fancy schools in the richer neighborhoods did. So they could come in and I already have this and I already have this project. You had to submit a portfolio to take a post-secondary course. And of course, I didn't have that. And at the time, I had no way to access that. That was paying for additional courses that I couldn't afford. All my money was going into, buying 2 pairs of shoes a year. And things like that. It was that is a serious issue, that the places that are certifying people expect families to provide things that in some instances families aren't. Now, is that directly connected to gender? I would say not completely, but to a point, yes. Because there were other kids in my school who did have access, because it's not necessarily a question of these things being horrendously expensive. You can learn how to code on a basic computer. It's that when you're a minor, you need the support of your family to be able to access these things at a younger age. Because if your parents don't like something you're doing, they can take it away from you. You'd have to hide it. And as much as my mother was, you should go into science, you should go into science, you should go into science, whenever I started adapting the lifestyle that was conducive to that sort of pursuit, she started worrying about my mental health, because it's secluded and it's not being around a lot of people and it's spending a lot of time in your room banging on a keyboard. And so even though she intended to encourage me towards the sciences, she was not properly informed about what that actually looked like in her daughter. And these are the sorts of things that I'm very concerned about. I was put through every women in technology, women in math, women in science course, right from like the third grade onward. There were certain identifiable periods where in the seventh grade, they took us all down to a baseball game and let us meet a player by the name of Mookie Wilson and gave us these little plastic computer things with like IBM branded on it. It was a corporate sponsored event, but IBM wasn't offering me money to go to school, so I couldn't go. These programs are expensive. You know, I could afford $500 in books for, something in the arts, but I couldn't afford the computer that was required. And it's even more expensive now. I mean, laptops are kind of mandatory. And, that was just not, and there wasn't the tradition in my family of people going to post-secondary education. And so there was no understanding that there are costs associated with higher education above tuition. And obviously, I care very much about this because this is not anybody going, we are going to oppress women. It's almost social inertia. It's almost people looking at the problem and say, we're going to offer encouragement. But nobody offered mentorship, and no one actually offered access. And encouragement without access just leads to cynicism and bitterness because everybody told you you could do it. Nobody taught you how. And this is really important because of the second issue that I am very concerned with, socialization. I personally believe that there are differences, and science backs me up on this. There are socializations between boys and girls that start around the age of 6 that negatively impact women in the working world. Dissuading girls from being assertive, a interest in being nice over being fair, a detour away from authenticity. All this stuff is stuff that's programmed into girls and really becomes a problem in business. Something as simple as speaking up in a room is not, that whole idea that, boys will be boys and they'll just run around and go crazy. And this is something inherently native to boys in a lot of people's minds. But the expectation of girls is we're supposed to be quieter and more still. Do you think that double standard disappears as people get older? No, it doesn't. There are certain behaviors that are associated with men that women are punished for exhibiting, and certain behaviors associated with women that men are punished for exhibiting. Blue Bloods just did an episode on this, which is a show aimed at like 50-plus-year-old people. And in this episode where the female cop gets dumped by her boyfriend because she took action during an armed robbery while he cowered under the table and couldn't handle it. In this exact same episode that sounds like it would be totally like pro-women's lib kind of thing, the female college student character, the granddaughter, gets chastised for using an insult at the family dinner table because she said something could be seen as sexist. And I thought this was a brilliant handling of both sides. Is, yes, some people are very uncomfortable with the word sexism. Fine, give me another word. And that's why I try to use words like double standard and cultural programming, because that's what they are. And having to talk around this is very interesting in a society that believes it prides itself on free speech. But this gets into the idea that speech isn't free if some people are being actively shouted down. Free speech to me is kind of like the way I was taught right of way in driving. That right of way is something that, yes, some people grant it, but you have to think of it as something, right of way is something you take. You have to be confident enough as a driver to go when it's your turn to go. because otherwise it's too hard to anticipate and people go, you go, you go, you go. Maybe this is something you guys don't see in America, but in Canada we're way too polite, and you'll see three people at a four-way stop and everybody's trying to wave each other, and then somebody finally goes and the logjam is blocked. Like, it's funny. It's a very Canadian thing. But, you know, to use that metaphor, boys are socialized to go run around, take initiative. Girls are trained to wait, to be given permission, not even ask permission, wait to be given permission. And that is not something men are doing to them, because men are basically like, and a lot of you are probably chuckling because the thought is, well, if she wants something, she'll ask. But the problem is that's not the way a lot of women are socially trained. We're trained to hint, we're trained to nag, but we're not trained to just go, I want this, I want to do this, because that's considered selfish, or heaven forbid it's considered mean. And so, and I bet people are going now, well, I met some women who, yeah, because there are some people who do buck this trend, who do defy it, but then they go so far into the other end of things that it actually is selfish. It is me, and the backstabbing and the nastiness and insulting people under the guise of helping. That's still not being an adult, autonomous, accountable human being. And so there is work to do in terms of what feminized social programming does to individuals. How much of an individual is a woman allowed to be under this current paradigm, especially in an age where people are saying that it isn't just about individual choice, it's about what's good for all women. And let me tell you something, guys, nothing is good for all women. There are some women who do want to be a stay-at-home mom, and they should have that right. But then there are people who say, but that doesn't help all women. Well, why not? Why not? Because it's a traditional gender role? We can exist in a society where that is equally valid. There are trade-offs, obviously, but I know a few women who are staying home to raise their kids. In one case, because they have a lot of kids, and that wasn't planned. The last three were, or last two were gifts, we'll say. And they decided, hey, babysitting is actually more expensive than any job I could take, so I'm going to make the best financial choice for myself. And that's totally valid. You know, other women want to go out and work. That should be seen as totally valid too. Now, the problem is a lot of female-oriented programming is on during the day. What does that say? You know, like, why not put these shows on when, you know, at times that are oriented towards career women while they don't watch? Well, because there's no tradition in looking for those shows right there, right? I mean, Sunday night is very loaded up with female counter programming, shows like Madam Secretary and, you know, Lucy Liu is Joan Watson on Elementary, things like that. So it is changing, but this stuff matters. This stuff matters when there are blocks of programming indicating to you what the normal rhythms of life are. That's powerful. And it's not say get rid of one for the other, it's have both. And develop that and give it a chance. And yes, there is a way to make money. These Sunday night shows are doing quite well in a lot of cases. But this is the big question. This is the question on everyone's minds right now. Now what? You know, cover the New York Times. After successive Women's March, a question remains, what next? And, you know, the reality about this march is that it wasn't about a single issue. It was just to get this. This was what it was about, these images. And I think it is an important message to let people know that there are millions of people, not just women, people, millions of individuals around the world who care about these issues, this collection of issues. And because there's been this very powerful narrative that we don't need women's rights anymore, deal's done, feminism's dying, it's a dated movement, all this stuff. Well, this was a really big indication that reports of its death have been greatly exaggerated. It's also an indication that gender signifiers aren't evil, like some analysts in video games that purport to be feminists claim, because you'll see with this picture, it's full of pink, which is a feminine gender signifier. You'll see right down at the bottom, you'll see that fist in the symbol for woman. Well, that is a feminine gender signifier. And there's been a misteaching, I guess, some false information disseminated by the idea that, how do I put this? Judith Butler's call to participate in subversive acts of gender does not mean that we ignore that gender norms are norms. That the whole idea of doing subversive acts of gender performance, subversive acts of gender performance, people are like, what does that mean? Is broadening the experience of what it means to be a man, of what it means to be a woman. Are we our gestures? Is the big question. Is this something that is feeling female or feeling male, something that is connected to body parts? Or is it something that is a series of gestures and performances? And there is no definitive answer for this. Some people are quite comfortable saying, yeah, I have a penis, so I'm a guy, or I have a vagina, so I'm female. And it was funny, on that same episode of Blue Bloods, she kept saying, the female cop didn't keep saying, it's because I'm a woman. She kept saying, I'm treated this way because I have a vagina. And I kept thinking, oh, some trans activists are going to be not too happy with this declaration. But for her, it was true. For her, that's how she felt. And that's not invalid because it offends some people who are dealing with a different set of minority rights. And that brings us to the other issue surrounding the examination of society's treatment of men versus society's treatment of women. The treatment of women is lumped in with minority rights issues, which ignores the fact that women are not a minority. We're half the population. That's not minority status. And this makes moving forward and understanding these issues exceptionally difficult, because over and over and over again, we run up against this wall of women being too big a group to be considered a class under social modeling structures and even the law. There was a class action lawsuit for gender discrimination dismissed against, I believe it was Walmart, because the judge determined that women is too big a group to be considered a class. It would have had to have been like pregnant women or black women or something like that. Women in general was too big. And this is fundamental to understand when we start talking about this idea of what was this march about? Because this march was about a lot of things for a lot of different people. And, one of the big controversies around it was whether or not pro-life feminists were able to participate. And it ended up this one group wasn't. I personally am not sure I would have made that call as an organizer. If people want to see, this is difficult, because if somebody is personally pro-life, I think that's fine. That's a decision they want to make for themselves. The minute anybody, I don't care what it is, starts advocating denying a freedom for other people, they better have a good reason. And that's where I think the sort of, pro-life thing butts up against feminist messaging. Because if you want to be pro-life in your personal life and your family and all that stuff, that's super fine. Don't tell other women what to do. That's why it's called pro-choice, not pro-abortion. because the whole idea is that that should be a choice a woman is allowed to make based on her own conscience. And certain research has actually said it's actually more emotionally nerve-wracking in a pro-choice society to make the choice to have an abortion, because the things that happened to women when abortion was illegal were so victimizing that being denied autonomy of choice made it easier, because these women were like stories about them being molested by their doctors and you know, having to pay under the table in this big cloak and dagger thing. They felt so awful about all the things that went around it. They never sat with the choice they'd just made, which is very interesting. But I don't know. I think a march this big, drawing a line, but that is what these organizers decided was something they were going to do. I don't know that I would have necessarily done that. I would have said, look, just if you want to have your organization logo, come, but don't, you know, be respectful that this is a hot button issue. I don't think I would have said you're not welcome. But that is my decision. I am not going to second guess. I'm just for interest's sake. But this is how complicated the things become, right? And this is why we need a certain set of underlying principles that are not being acted on. Because the thing about these you know, community organizers, they like to keep things so simple. And the cycle is kind of, we're going to raise awareness by holding an event, so we can do another thing that raises awareness, which means we can raise more awareness, so we can raise awareness. And then the question is, raise awareness of what? And this is where we start getting into issues, because the minute you take a stand on something of, we are going to raise awareness of, say, access to abortion, well, then that gets people upset with you, right? Because some people think abortion shouldn't be legal. I personally think it should be legal. But then you get into because to me, the argument there is, you have to come up with a reason to deny someone a freedom. I don't have to come up with a reason to grant them that freedom. The burden is on the pro-life side. And it kills babies is not enough, because there are other legal activities that kill people. You know, the argument is more nuanced than that. And yeah, there are legal things that kill innocents, like firearms, and those are legal. Fine. You're not going to have a bubble wrap society. That is not a society based on the paradigm of maximum freedom. Some stuff is going to happen, and it's terrible. But you have to have certain core values in your messaging and not deviate from it. And this becomes a difficult thing in the women's movement because of the definitive intersection with Marxism in the history of the women's movement. And Marxism does not believe in that idea. It believes in collectivism. It believes in seeing people as classes. It doesn't work as an economic model, and I don't necessarily believe it works long-term as a social model. I think at some point people have to self-define as individuals and say, this is what I think, and this is what matters to me, and this is my perspective, and this is valid. And I think that until you can do that with confidence, you're going to be ineffective as an activist. But that's precisely what's going on at this point. I mean, if you go to the Women's March on Washington webpage, okay, they're now trying to turn the moment into a movement. So it's 10 actions for 100 days. But you go down and, okay, what the first action? Write a postcard to your senators about what matters most to you. It would be great right here if there was like 6 little links linking people to the issues. Like, what sort of thing? You know, what sort of thing are priorities for this group? Not telling, just informing, like I'm doing right here. But they don't have that. It's just, what matters to you? Well, That's very open-ended. And they know that people get choice paralysis. So this is actually an organizational mistake. They should have 3 or 4 issues as suggestions and link people to more information to read up on those issues. But then get your cards. Okay, great, because mass-produced cards that take minimal effort are so effective. This stuff, I'll tell you, when you get 1 million identical messages, it's less powerful than 100 specific ones. And I know this because when I get tweet stormed, and it's the same words, there are certain words that just, all right, this is all coming from the same soup. You know, the fact that everybody chose this particular identifiable word to express themselves, this is an echo chamber in action, and I disregard it. But when I start hearing the same message told to me differently by different people, that is much more powerful. Which, oh, this person, 4 different people said similar things, and they said it in their own way, but it was all sort of an intersection of interest here. That's way more powerful as far as I'm concerned. That matters so much more. And this is what this, approach doesn't do well. Write your own letter. Don't print out, seeing a bunch of these signs looks spin doctored. The reason this is so powerful is it's a collection of handmade signs. Meaning one person, one sign kind of thing. You don't see mass-produced signs. You don't see things that were just printed out on a label. People took a small amount of effort, but it was less than the bare minimum, and that matters. So hear our voice about what? About what? This is what people keep asking, and it's failing to answer the question. Now, make them your own. Oh, here we go again. Write down your thoughts. Pour your heart out on any issue you care about, whether it's, here we finally get to it, which should have been right off the damn top. What do you care about? What are some samples of the issues? We finally get to it in step 2. No, step 1 should be figure out why you care about something and get informed. That should be the first damn thing. Because the reality about this shit, government doesn't care about your feels. Government cares about something that is going to get them reelected. And yes, feelings are involved in that, but something making you feel bad, half these people are goddamn sociopaths. They don't care. You have to mount a strong argument, and you can't do that if you don't know what you're talking about beyond personal experience. But, okay, here are the issues. Gender-based violence, reproductive rights and women's health, LGBTQIA rights, workers' rights, civil rights, immigrant rights, religious freedom, environmental justice, or anything else. I mean, religious freedom is kind of funny there since they didn't let the pro-life group in. But environmental justice? I get it. They needed to be clearer. If this is about engaging women in the political process, then peachy. If this is trying to encourage women to learn how to communicate with their various government representatives, and Women's March Unity Principles, okay, we finally got them. People don't want principles. People want information on these issues. And okay, the page takes too long to load. Screw it. This should be up here. This should be up here. Together to raise our voices for what? For what? And yeah, you'll get a lot of people when you can't define what you're about, but you're wasting those people's time. Raise our voices for women's participation in politics. That's valid. That doesn't negate anything else that's going on here. March forward to where? How do you march if you have no direction? If your issue is just getting more women involved in the political process, awesome. I think that's an absolute noble goal. If it's not about a single issue, it's about actually encouraging people to take action for their own issues, that should be here. But it's not. And this just seems like a big old compromise that really doesn't stand for anything but various photo ops. And yes, they're very powerful photo ops, but those are those are moments, not movements. And the New York Times article talks about the fact that the unifying cause is in the 60s were fairly simple. The Vietnam War, civil rights, stuff like that. That people are like, what are we doing? We're protesting the Vietnam War. We think this specific thing is bad. Now, part of the reason this march was so big is it was a lot of different things, but fine, you don't have to have one thing. But if it's 6 things, that can still get across in a press release. That can still be covered in a paragraph. But they just went, oh no, everyone's welcome. Well, then how do you decide what you work on first? These leaderless, actions don't tend to enact much change. You may get little things here and there, but in terms of real lasting change, nobody's setting an agenda. Nobody's telling people or marking out paths, suggesting where people should march. That's not what's going, on. And this is a criticism here. And the unifying factor is we don't like Trump. Well, that's nice. That isn't policy. If you don't like that he's repealing the healthcare law, okay, that's something. Offer an alternative. Because nobody denies that these premiums are an issue. The rise of premiums, Obamacare never did anything to control costs. While Obama was running against McCain, publications like The Economist said as much. They said Obamacare grants coverage. It gets more people, it addresses coverage. It gets more people buying health insurance. But it doesn't do anything to address costs. McCain's plan was designed to address costs. So if things weren't so hyper-partisan, they would have looked at it and took the best ideas of both plans and created one really amazing Voltron's Wonder Twins healthcare plan that would have gotten more people healthcare and controlled rising costs. Because one of the big things McCain was advocating for was allowing people to buy insurance across state lines. And that would have been more cost effective for the government, because if the government is subsidizing this stuff, well, they better be paying the lowest price possible. And the only way to pay the lowest price possible is to be able to comparison shop across state lines. So there was a way around this mess. But it was that sticky thing called bipartisanship that nobody likes. And they were also Obamacare wasn't just fighting McCain's plan. The biggest thing going for Obamacare at the time was it's not Hillary care. This isn't a loser plan. This was something that was, quite frankly, popularized by a Republican. Obamacare and Romney care look really similar on paper in places. So there was a missed opportunity there because everybody was, I'm going to express myself. And no one was interested in creating the best possible plan. It was, this is an identity piece. This is legacy. This bears his name. That's not effective. That's not effective. At some point, you have to take your ego out of your activism, right? And do what's right. And so let's see what else we got. We got to make them their own and share it with the world and send it to your senator. That's 2 very different things. How about just send it to your senator? Because let me tell you, the world's choking on this stuff. The world has its own issues. And if everybody's going, pay attention to me, nobody's paying attention to each other. The best thing you can do is before you start squawking about what you're doing, offer some support to somebody else first. Offer a helping hand to somebody. Show some positivity to someone else, because then you don't seem self-absorbed. Then you can set the example of, look, I am going to lend my hand to my fellow human being. and do something in solidarity before I start getting on my own soapbox. Because then we can find common ground between the two things that matter to us. And we can come up with a plan that addresses both those concerns. Not perfectly, but more effectively if we're all shouting into a collective vacuum. And that's pretty much it. So this whole action is write your local representative. Well, you know what's much more useful than share it with your friends? Provide a template for a letter that shows people how to find out who your senator actually is. Where's the database, right? Where are the tools empowering people to do this? How to properly compose a letter, not a freaking postcard, a letter. How to properly compose this. And then some suggested things that people can either use or come up with their own thing, but you're actually teaching someone about the process. You are empowering them to do it for themselves next time. This is big on yay us and very light on detail. And in that point, you know, the thing that is so disheartening to me about this whole thing is it's the same issues that people were protesting in the 1960s and 1970s. If you look at the civil rights movement, it has evolved. You know, the issues of, you know, desegregated schools. Well, we've dealt with that. We're backsliding. But for the most part, it is not a question of black people can't go to white schools. You know, there are, like I said, not totally. America has not completely healed from the practices that I addressed last week in my Monday video. There's still a hangover from that. But now we're moving into, you know, areas of a more mosaic black experience where shows like Blackish and the debate over shows like, you know, the show Moesha or Bernie Mac compared to families like the Huxtables or the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, they're actually identifying that no, there has been some upward mobility. When it comes to women's issues, we're still talking about equal pay for equal work and fucking abortion. Those are the exact same issues and gender-based violence and the objectification of women. This is all the same shit talked about in exactly the same way for the most part as people were doing in the 1960s and 70s. We're stuck. And part of the reason we're stuck is that we're not dealing with any meat. This is freaking activist veganism. Where's the protein? Where's the beef? You know, that's a dated reference. This is non-food. This is veggie bacon. Most people want actual bacon, and I say this as somebody who can't eat meat because my digestive system is screwed up. But if I could eat meat, I would eat meat. But this is not effective. And this is all summarized by this image that I'm going to leave you on. I love this lady on the right. This should be the message. This should be the message. I can't believe I still have to protest this fucking shit. That should be the message. We should be taking a good, hard look at we are fighting about the same crap. Why have we not, you know, just considered this a done deal? Why can we not just say that legalized abortion is the law of the land? We don't have to like it, but we have to accept that my ability to live my life my way is contingent upon letting other people live their lives their way. You know, I don't have to like it. Same with gun ownership, right? I think that there is a lot more. The Second Amendment is the Second Amendment. It's not going away. Now, there are some people who do say we should just take away all the guns in America. We don't have this issue in Canada. But I think people would be surprised how many long guns still are out there in Canada because of how much area we have as rural, but that's a digression. But this should just be the law of the land. There should not be politicians still making money to repeal Roe versus Wade. It's a settled issue. At some point, the common goal should be reducing the number of abortions that happen every year. Try to get that number as close to zero as possible. And I think that's a goal everybody can agree on. But we're not doing that. We're still defund Planned Parenthood, overturn Roe versus Wade. It's not the best use of time. It's not. Let it be legal and try to reduce it. And I just noticed a Star Wars symbol in this. That's pretty cool. But it's things like that. Why are we still arguing with this shit? The wage, the compensation gap is still there. And instead of arguing about whether it exists, we should be taking a good, hard, uncomfortable look at why that statistic is the way it is. Not trying to debunk it or not trying to just repeat it as many places as we possibly can, but actually look at why this is happening. And the messy thing about that is it's going to be a different intersection of issues for every individual. Because women are individuals, and we hear human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights. But what we don't hear is individual rights are women's rights and women's rights are individual rights. And that is what we should be pushing. We need to make women comfortable being individuals, because maximum individual freedoms are good for men, they're good for women, and part of that is economic empowerment, because people's freedoms reduce drastically when they are poor. And if we focused on poverty reduction, a lot of these very serious issues would diminish. Now, that starts getting a bit messy when you get into gender-based violence, but gender-based violence, again, is more effective based on a consensus approach, because I think part of the lack of movement in the whole gender-based violence thing is that it's been gendered. It's seen as something men do to women instead of things that intimate partners do to intimate partners. And that makes it harder for men to report because it's something that happens to women. That unfortunately makes it harder to deal with in terms of getting actual action on it, because there's that, oh, can you go away somewhere where I can care about you from a safe distance? Nobody wants to actually confront the realities of domestic violence, because let me tell you, it's ugly. Intimate partner violence is ugly, and it's scary, and it's traumatizing for everybody who's around it. And these are ugly truths. These are beyond inconvenient truths. These are ugly truths. And we need to have the collective bravery to stand together and really get into this stuff and really have difficult discussions, not debates. We need brainstorming sessions on these issues. And that's part of the reason that for the interests of this, the pro-life perspective has to be allowed at the table, because we have to be able to have these discussions. If they're not there, how can we say to them, like, why are you telling me what I can do? And don't throw the fucking Bible at me, because we're supposed to have freedom of religion and freedom from religion in this country. If I don't believe what you believe, I shouldn't be, and I shouldn't be subject to your religious prohibitions. And, we don't get into that, things like, general murder and all that stuff, because everybody, religious and irreligious people alike, know that killing, murdering innocents is wrong. That's just one of those things that, hey, we can agree on. Yay, break for lunch. And so this is very important. The idea of individualized freedoms is something we have lost in these class-based, is it good for women, is it bad for women paradigms. We have to bring back individual rights are women's rights and women's rights are individual rights. It's true. And there are a lot of people who have made their careers saying the opposite message. But real change means real change. And so some of our leaders of yesterday are not going to be the leaders of tomorrow. It may be time for fresh thinking. And that's scary because, yes, people do have their careers banked on this idea, is it good for all women? And to me, that just denies the individuality of 50% of the population. Not living in poverty is good for all women. So if you're interested in what's good for all women, how about focus there and stop telling me what I should wear and what I should say and what video games I should play. Because no, that isn't bad for all women and that isn't good for all women. It just is. It's stupid entertainment. And I am enough of an individual, I am enough of a free thinker to not suddenly start changing the way I believe because I play something like Grand Theft Auto. Now, it's not my favorite game in the world because of the way I view the world, but I'm not saying ban it. I'm saying it's not to my taste. But I don't think there's something wrong with somebody if Grand Theft Auto is their favorite freaking game ever. Why? Because they may just want to wreck cars and drive around doing stupid shit. It has nothing to do with the issues I don't like about it. Because the truth is, to me, my biggest problem with Grand Theft Auto is I can't identify with any of the characters. None of them. They have never clicked for me. That's it. That's it. And that's true of other games too, right? But hope you enjoyed this perspective. Like I said, it's just my opinion. And I went a bit long, but there's a lot. But yeah, anybody who presents you with an action plan that is either so weak on detail that they can't maintain fundamental principles, even though they have something called unity principles. Oh, here we are. Here's their principles buried on. This is not a women's platform. This is a general progressivism platform hidden under women workers, right? Oh, there's the Marxism. There it is, right there. But civil rights, these are not okay. It's great to care about this stuff, and there are arguments, but where is the indication of intersection? Where is the way these things tie into quality of life specifically for women? You are a women's march. You are not a women's rights, gay march, right, workers' rights march, civil rights march, disability rights march, immigration. Like, this is a progressive march. Like, this is not going to get anything done. There's no priorities here. This feels like a cheat. And this can be fixed. I mean, something as simple as what specific aspect of disability rights intersects with women's rights. It kind of says that, but give people a little bit of information about how it uniquely affects women. You know, immigrant rights. How does it uniquely affect women? Environmental justice. Let's have these things in various countries, because this is a women's rights march on Washington. How does this affect women here? You know, like it could just be, oh, guess what? Oil jobs. Here's how many jobs it creates for men. Here's how many jobs it creates for women. So if we're a resource-based economy, we get left behind. Something as simple as that. Civil rights. How about dealing, and they're claiming civil rights is the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment was not the Civil Rights Act. It was equal rights for women. And there are women who opposed it because they didn't want to lose their workers' rights gains. Things like maternity leave and things like that, because if you're given equal rights under the law, then either men had to be granted paternity leave as well, which I agree, or women would lose their maternity rights protections, because you can't give one thing to one gender and not the other under the Equal Rights Amendment. Women needed to be able to serve in the military. We're crossing that barrier now, but there were serious issues back in the 1970s about the ERA. And fine, but this is just the same old, remember what I said about women not stepping up and asking for things? This is the organizers of the Women's March not getting up there and saying, no, it's time for women's rights to matter. And we got to stop being nice. We got to start being those nasty women that they all claim to be. Well, nasty women say, look, we address some of these issues affecting women. We address some of these perception issues regarding women. And yes, trying to figure out why the hell it seems to be more likely right now that men will beat up their wives more than women beat up their husbands. It might not even be true, because men really underreport intimate partner violence. But let's stand up and actually say, no, we're women and that matters. We don't have to wait our turn while all these other damn issues are addressed. I can see an intersection point with LGBTQIA stuff, because a lot of the interesting contributions to gender performance writing and feminism were done by queer authors. That's awesome. But your sexuality and your gender identity are not the same thing. And yes, we have the power to control our bodies and be free from gender norms, expectations, and stereotypes. Sure, but what does that have to do with whether you're gay or straight or somewhere in between? This is just trying to up your numbers. And yeah, I do think that to an extent a living minimum wage is important, but all they needed to put here is because the lousy minimum wage affects single mothers more acutely than any other group in America. That just has to be there. And then these people stop going, well, what do they stand for? I totally get the complaint. Like, this is foolish. This is a cop-out. Stand for something. There's too much here. They're trying to stand for so many other places. They're just going to fall over. You can't possibly do this all at once. So, hope you find this useful. And I say this because I care. I say this because I want to see change. But I totally understand the complaints of people that they don't know what this is about. Because it's not about any one thing. It's about unity principles. Oh, that's nice. That's just perpetuating the goddamn female stereotype that everybody has to get along always and everybody has to be nice. No, there are some things you're just not going to like. And there are some things that are right and some things that are wrong. And it's imperative on you to make the fucking case for yourself. But, you know, there's no issue involving female socialization. Nope, it's all done. Spare me.